Welcome back to another episode of the Open Source Cafe. And today I'm really excited for this episode because we're joined by Seokho and Catherine, and we're going to talk about open source contributions and the CNCF glossary. So let's start a little bit, before we get into the agenda with the introduction. We can go ahead with Catherine. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Well, first of all, Kunal, thanks so much for having us. I'm Catherine. I am the co-chair of the Business Value Subcommittee and a maintainer of the Cloud Native Glossary. I work at Buoyant. That's the creator of Linkerd, the CNCF graduated service mesh. Originally, I'm from Germany, but I am now based in DC.
Hi, my name is Seokho. I'm a maintainer of Cloud Native Glossary as well. I'm a researcher and in Electronics and Telecommunications Research Institute, quite long. In short, we call it ETRI in South Korea, which is a National Research Institute in South Korea. I'm conducting research and development in the cloud computing domain, and contributing to open source is kind of my hobby. And I'm leading and being involved in several open source projects, such as Korean localization team of Kubernetes official website and multi-cloud open source project called Cloud Barista. I'm leading a sub-project in Cloud Barista community.
Amazing. Well, thanks a lot for joining. And South Korea was there in 2019, lovely place. And thanks a lot for joining us today. So before we get started, I wanted to have this session because we have a huge community of students and the CNCF students, and they often ask how to get involved in open source. CNCF projects are really big and it's so complex, and what do you have to learn? So I believe open source is for everyone. Every contribution counts. Newcomers and experienced folks, even non-code contributions. So Catherine, maybe you can share a little bit more about what is the glossary for, to someone who may not have heard this term before.
Sure. So the glossary is a CNCF open source project, but instead of code, you contribute words. In our case, cloud native definitions. And the idea is really to explain these complex cloud native concepts in very simple words. And ideally, so anyone can understand them, even without a computer science degree. And turns out that's actually pretty hard, but it's a great way to learn and solidify your knowledge. So the glossary is a new project. The website went live at KubeCon NA, so just a few months ago, with 50 terms. And we're now adding more and more to it. And our goal is really to become a trusted source anyone in our industry can rely on, right? Like to learn about cloud native concepts, to help explain them to other people. Maybe you're struggling to explain to your family and friends what you're doing, right? Like, and hopefully the glossary and how things are explained there will help you kind of bring that to them in a simple way. And also for them to use it as a reference, right? But to become this trusted source, quality is really, really key, right? People trust the CNCF. If you see a resource from the CNCF, you assume it's accurate and right, so you trust it really, right? And the CNCF trusts the community. So it's really important for us to uphold that trust, right? That means the maintainers and the contributors. Quality is really important, so we can become that source. So I think that's a nutshell.
And how did the idea come, for this? Why did you create the glossary, and why does it matter? Because if you're talking about terms, before the glossary, how people used to do it, and then it was like, okay, we need this glossary thing. So why does it matter?
I mean, like, let's go first, like, how did we start with it? So, right, as I mentioned before, I am the co-chair of the Business Value Subcommittee. And our goal is to create different resources for people who don't necessarily have a technical background to understand it, right? Because it's more and more relevant today, right? Like, it's before it used to be this niche thing that only technical people were involved in. Today, more and more business people are involved in it as well. So there is a need to explain these concepts in a way that anyone can understand. So before doing any of that, we realized, okay, maybe we need to start kind of all agreeing on how we talk about this, because there are so many terms and like if so many sources, you Google something and you find lots of different definitions, and sometimes they're similar, sometimes not. So we were saying, okay, the first step is really to agree on it. And the best place for that to live, of course, is on the CNCF, right? So that is the how it happened, and why it matters is really. So we really think, Kubernetes and the whole ecosystem has been kind of like this mystic, weird thing for a long time, right? Like it's very complex, and we really want to make it broadly accessible and demystify it so anyone can understand it, right? Like we want to help engineers just getting started, but also non-technical people who need to understand these concepts for work. Like take an example, for instance, the C-suite, right? Like they are the ones who will decide whether to migrate an application to a microservices architecture. That's a multi-million-dollar project. That's not something that the IT department will decide on their own, right? So they need to have this discussion with their technical team and make a decision, right? And they need a resources that is reliable, that they can trust, and that is easy to understand. And so I think there was like a big, that kind of content was and still is missing, right? And so basically the glossary is creating the first step. It's not like the glossary doesn't explain everything, but it's like a very high level definition that will help you then do the next step and then like go a little deeper, right? So it's the very first kind of thing you might read, and then to allow you to go a little deeper. Because we also are localizing it, so I think that's a very important aspect as well. So I was just wondering if Seokho could tell a little bit about why localization is so important, because it's not only the glossary, because that's in English, right, the original one, but like localizing it is also super important.
Sure. First of all, since we are talking about localization, not translation, I hope to share why we use localization instead of translation. So in case of translation, it is a process of changing the source language content into another target language. It is very simple translation. Changing language. But localization itself is a process of adapting content for different country, region, and locality. So it requires cultural preferences and experiences, customs in their own languages. So maybe you can just think this localization is a better form of translation. So we are going to say it is localization, not just translation. So currently, cloud native computing and cloud native content are very English centric. Actually, since the open source itself is mostly developed by countries which use English, but understanding the complex concept is difficult. Also, it is for foreigner who cannot read English very well. To them, it is very, very difficult to understand. So our goal of the Cloud Native Glossary in terms of the localization is making cloud native concepts and technologies more accessible to anyone in the world, not just people who are using English. So that's the reason why localization is very important for us.
And how many like languages do we have like the definitions in right now?
Currently, localization in glossary is in an initial stage. So you will not see the localized content from glossary site currently yet, but there is many localization teams such as Korean, not such as I'll tell you or list Korean, Portuguese, Hindi, German, Italian, Arabic, Bengali, Spanish, Chinese teams, and more teams are trying to initialize their teams, more languages, and they are working on the initial live version, and it requires at least 10 localized terms. And as I know, Hindi team is about to finish it and Bengali team as well. So you will see the live localized content from the CNCF glossary site soon.
Yeah, I've seen those folks. They are students from India who are doing the Hindi localization. Shout out to them. Really great work. But that's where the contributors come in. So now the next question is, cool, this is all sounding pretty nice. How can community members be a part of this project and contribute?
Yeah, so I mean, the first thing is use it, read it, right? Look at it. If you see that a term is missing, raise an issue, right? If that's all you wanted to do, right? If all you wanted to do is kind of tell people this is missing, but you don't want to work on it, that's it, job done, right? That's already a little tiny contribution, right? But if you want to work on that issue, ask that issue to be assigned to you. And once that is done, you can work on a definition, start working on a definition. But remember, this is, if your term gets merged, this is basically going to be the official CNCF definition. So, right, like that's a big responsibility, right? So it's like accuracy is really important. So it's something that you shouldn't be taking too lightly. They're not something that you're gonna do really quick. So it's really important to do research, right? Even if you think that you know everything already, you know the term, you're very confident, still do some research and verify, because sometimes people use terms in a very specific way in a company or in school, and it's not the full picture, and you think it is. So do some research and verify that your version of it is really the full picture. We also recommend working with Google or Word doc, and do multiple revisions, right? Again, as I mentioned, like explaining complex term in an easy way is not that easy, and you need sometimes to look at it several times. So make a first draft, let it sit, revisit it again. Does it still make sense? Ask a friend or a colleague for input. And if you let it sit for a little while, you will see it's easier to assess again. Is it simple enough, right? Are all the words that you're using commonly known, right? If not, is there an existing term in the glossary that we should link to? If there is, we should always link to it, right? If there isn't, can we provide a little bit more context, right? And so the ultimate text is basically, would your non-technical friends understand this, right? You can do it as a thought exercise, right? Like imagining your friends, or you can ask them, just share the doc with them and ask them, like, does it make sense for you? If they are, it's probably simple enough. Again, this will be the official CNCF definition until someone improves it. So it's like always changing, ideally, right? But that cannot be a quick thing, right? Like, because like it is, quality takes time, and it takes working with the maintainers to get there. Collaboration is really key. And that's the essence for any open source project, right? Like it's always collaboration. So there's always like kind of like these exchanges, and that's basically the essence of it. If you want to improve an existing term, submit a PR. That is generally easier than starting from scratch, right? Because you may just kind of add something here or there, but still the same best practice should apply, right? Do some research, take your time, verify. I mean, it's easier, but still like the same standard should apply. So I think like if you take that in mind, we have great how to contribute guide that kind of walks you through the different processes, but kind of take those processes as well and in mind, and that you have to kind of think it through and take, basically taking your time when you're doing it. I think that is kind of the essence here. And of course, then there's also the localization part of it, which is a little different. Seokho, do you want to talk a little bit about that part?
Sure. Yeah, in case of localization, we also have maybe 3 contribution way. First one is contributors can initiate a new team, localization team, if there is no, and you are going to manage the contributors will supposed to manage and find volunteers for that language. And second one is contributing a new localization for a term, localizing new term. And to contribute to new localization, you need to know each team has its own way to assign tasks and track localization progress. For instance, Hindi and Korean teams are using GitHub issue to trace and assign the items to localize, and then and German language team is using GitHub project dashboard, and the other teams are using the Slack channel and keep discuss by using messages. And from those ways, you can find a task and get assigned for a task to task, and then you can go work for that task. And the reason why you need to be assigned is to prevent duplicated works among other contributors. Got the assignment, then you are going to localize the term based on a style that team will guide. And after you finish, you are going to open a PR. And you should know that the contributors should know that opening a PR is not the end of contribution. You need to keep improving the PR based on reviewers' comment. Reviewer means currently we have approvers for localization language for each localization teams. So you are going to review from approvers, and at least 2 approvers need to give approving review. Then that your job will be merged to localization branch. And updating and improving the PR itself is contributors' responsibility. I hope to note that. And finally, you can improve on existing one. If you see localized documents that could be improved, then you can just submit a PR to collect and change the content. And maybe the task may be very huge. If you think the improvement is very huge, then before open a PR, you'd better to open an issue first, so that the localization approvers can discuss and determine whether to update that content or not. Okay, I guess that's I briefly introduced how to contribute to localization.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks a lot for sharing. And I really like your point about that organizations, institutions, and students, and they all have a different definition of some of these terms. So previously, I had this misconception. Whenever someone asked me what is Kubernetes, and I was like, it's a container orchestration platform. And then I realized it's much more than that. and that's what it says in the glossary as well. So yeah, I believe it's a pretty cool way, to get started as well with open source contributions. Speaking of which, I was checking out the glossary, and it has a little bit of a theme going on. So you have a term, and then you have like three parts to it. What the term is, problems it addresses, and how it helps. So maybe you can share a bit more about both of you in terms of like the English one and localization one. Like, what are some of the best practices, if someone wants to contribute?
Yeah, I think like the three. Well, at the beginning we were kind of thinking to have those three sections just as a guide, right? Like, because it keeps you focused. Like, what is it, the problem it addresses, and how it helps. And then we wanted to take it off, but like as soon as you take it off, people start blurring it together, and it becomes this like. And so we said like, well, let's just leave it in there. And actually, one of the things that's interesting, and we do it over and over again, and that's one of the things that we have to correct people as well. But like we've done it multiple times, is like the problem it addresses, people start talking about the solution, right? It's like, and the problem it addresses is like should not even, ideally not even mention what we're talking about, right? If you're explaining what's the problem that Kubernetes is addressing, we don't need to talk about Kubernetes, because that's before Kubernetes. Like, what was the issue? Why did we need Kubernetes, right? Or why did we need DevOps, right? And then in the next section, you start introducing, okay, how does this term or this concept that we're explaining here address that problem? So, and I think like keeping that really separated helps a lot. And like really, if you just want to know what it is, like what is it, like the first section is more than enough, right? Like, and then you can get a little deeper. So even though we found that at the beginning it sounds a little silly, right, kind of having those things, we realize that it really keeps us focused and helps kind of keep the content really really clear. There's one exception, and that's another thing we realized, like properties. We were trying to, I think with observability, we were trying to, but observability, a property, it's like a property, it's not addressing a problem, it's a property, right? So that's the only one that does not have it. So again, we were trying to kind of say what it is, the problem it addresses, and at some point we were realizing it doesn't really make sense. So we're trying to keep those formats to keep people as they write it, like focused on what it, on like how, and make sure that all terms are explained in the same manner. So I think that has worked pretty well. And if you're wondering why we're doing those sections, I think that's like the main kind of thing to the structure that I can say. Seokho, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, maybe I can share some best practice in localization. I think there is no best practice in localization yet, because as I mentioned before, it is very initial stage and there is no like version of localized content language yet. I think, the best one is many contributors make many contributors be involved in this localization, and making them make some noise, not some noise, lots of noise. I mean, lots of discussions. Sometimes people try to just follow the existing style, but since in case of localization, it is initial stage, many people need to see and review what is difference with them current status, and then those discussions will improve the quality of localization. So I think it is best practice for localization perspective.
Amazing. Well, thanks a lot for sharing. And all the links that we have mentioned, like the resources and the GitHub repository, even the link to the glossary, I'll leave those in the description below so you can get started. Before we move on to, this is my second last question. So before we move on to like how to get involved and share some resources with the folks, can you maybe talk a little bit more about why people should contribute? So even if someone is just starting out or someone who's experienced, why contributing to it? Why would someone want to do that? I mean, it's a pretty obvious question, but still, in case someone is wondering, Catherine, how would you answer that?
Yeah, first of all, going back to the mission, I feel like the mission of the glossary is very important, right? Like we're trying to make these terms accessible. And it's really important what's going on in Cloud Native is really, I feel like sometimes there is a revolution going on in the IT world, and a lot of people don't know it, or just are trying to understand it. There's people who are outside of our community, right? So making that accessible is very important. Because more and more people are getting touched as it gets more mainstream. More and more people are touched by it and need kind of to understand it. So I do believe it's an important mission, and for it to be valuable, it must be accurate and comprehensive, right? And that is very difficult. Like that's like a huge task, right? And basically, by inviting the community, achieving that is a lot easier and faster, right? Because you have a lot of people, everyone can contribute, and you get there a lot easier and faster, right? Because you have more people working on it. And as to why people in general should contribute, I hope they see that value, right? I hope they see that is important. We hope that they want to be part of it because they see the value. They want to be an active part of it and help grow and improve it. And in general, it's a great way to get experience in open source, as you already mentioned, Kunal. There are many open source projects. This is one of them. There is no code, so that's a little different. But the community aspect is very similar, right? Like you collaborate, you help, the whole what Seokho was talking about as well, right? You submit a PR, it's not the end of it. Maintainers and approvers provide feedback. So the whole collaboration in the process, that's the same, right? Like that's like very similar to any other open source project. So getting that experience is one good aspect of it. And while you don't need to be a coder or a great coder or a coder at all, you do need to have the willingness to do the research and write up good definitions. And that is again, like a really, really good way to learn, right? Because sometimes you think you know things until you have to explain them very, very easily. So it's a very, I feel it's a very good way to learn more about it. And that's how I learned about Cloud Native. It's really kind of trying to explain these terms. Do you think anything on the localization part?
Yeah, sure. In terms of localization, yeah, as Catherine mentioned about our CNCF Glossary project is open source project, and if the contributors feel hard to communicate in English, maybe localization is the good first and easier starting point for an open source contribution, because contributors in this localization team can communicate in a familiar language. So it will be much easier to feel and experience the workflows in open source project. And also, I think meeting local experts and friends is very beneficial to contributors who are not expert yet, such as students or non-technical people. And also, I think it is not just about meeting experts, and it is about sharing a goal and experience with experts. So maybe those local experts will think they can introduce the contributors to company or company or research institute like me. Yeah, I think it is very nice point. So come to CNCF Glossary project and contribute to localization.
Yeah. I would like to add one thing to that, because
Yeah.
I have a feeling, I don't know, because localization teams are like real teams, they all know each other and they have to work together. So it's almost, I feel like it's a lot more fun too, because like you really have that little community. Because it's like some of them have like weekly meetings, and so it's like really like you have more of a well, I think like we have like a really an amazing community in the glossary itself, general, but like people don't know each other that well, right? Because they may help each other here and there. But within localization teams, you have like a much smaller team. They work very closely together. And so it's really, they become like this little real team, and working. So it's like, yeah, I think like the whole working together aspect and I really feel like, yeah, I kind of like see them like it feels like they have a lot of fun. So it's not only like the learning, but I think it's also like a great experience overall.
Yeah.
Amazing. And we can go like all day long about how open source can help you in your career and learn by doing and learning in public and all these other things. But I believe the best way to get started is just to get started. And speaking of which, how do folks get started? Maybe you can share some resources, both for the English glossary and localization.
Yeah, I think like if you think this is interesting, the first thing you should do is to hop on the glossary channel on the CNCF Slack and say hi. It's a very welcoming community. And yeah, if you want to localize, then Seokho.
Yeah, in case of localization, yeah, come to glossary localization channel in CNCF Slack, and maybe you can find channel for each language team, so you can say your language inside of that channel.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is the first step.
Yeah, and so that's great. So once you're there, yeah, and then we have the how to contribute guide and the style guide, which is very detailed. Also, one thing to say, like if someone is not familiar with GitHub yet, because it's all GitHub based, right? Like the how to contribute guide, we created like a very detailed, like step-by-step instructions, thinking of people who are not familiar with it yet. So there is literally a screenshot for every single click. So it's very, we try to make it very easy because we know not everyone may be a GitHub expert yet. So check out those two resources. And yeah, do read the style guide carefully because that will reduce back and forth because a lot of the expectations are in there. And so if you don't, if you're not fully aware of that, then once you submit the PR, there may be more back and forth than you need to. So I think that's it. Like hop on the channels, read the guides, and yeah, pick a term or like there are lots of issues. Oh, that's the other thing. Like we have join us.
Amazing. When all the links and resources, everything that they mentioned, I'll leave those in the description. Once again, you can check it out and join the Slack channel if you have any questions. And a lot of folks will be able to help you out. But please, I know how students can be. Please get in the habit of researching as well. Google before asking the question. And even if you don't get the answers after a simple search, then you can ask in the channel. Also, code of conduct as well. This is a CNCF project, so always make sure you're following code of conduct, not spamming folks. Since it's an open source project, PRs can be open for a while, so be patient and just follow some of the community best practices. I've already shared that on my channel a lot of times. Cool. Well, that was pretty much about it. And thanks everyone for joining. Really appreciate you giving the time. And yeah, hopefully we'll see some nice contributors and get your open source journey started. Once again, thanks for creating the glossary as well. Sure, it's going to help a lot of folks. And yeah, we'll see you in the next one. Have a great day.
Yes.
Bye.
Thank you. Thanks for having us, Cloud. Bye.